The Marvel comic universe desperately needs a change in order to keep the franchise from buckling under its own weight, and a buddy comedy starring Deadpool and Wolverine ain't gonna cut it. The studio has plenty to deal with already, from the overuse of CGI to a confusing web of storylines and in-universe lore for newcomers, but in this video we're focusing on the problem with Phase 7 and how the MCU could avoid it. So let's get started. First up, Marvel's gonna run out of content eventually. Marvel's plans for Phases 5 and 6 expose a huge problem for Phase 7, and if they don't get a handle on it now, we're worried the franchise as a whole might spiral out of control. Obviously, we're not saying there's a lack of content in the MCU right now. On the contrary, we've got a new series and feature film coming out every few months. But here's the thing, the MCU is currently relying on comic storylines that'll bottleneck the entire franchise in a few years. Phases 1 and 2 followed characters and storylines that had made a name for themselves decades earlier in the comics, like Iron Man and the Hulk, but the more recent phases, especially the fourth one, have followed newer characters and stories. For example, Civil War was based on the 2006 comic of the same name. America Chavez from Multiverse of Madness was introduced even more recently in 2011, and Ms. Marvel was introduced to Marvel Comics back in 2013, and less than 10 years later she was in the MCU. Trent? What's more, Phases 5 and 6 will continue to rely on the new Avengers. If things continue as planned, with the exception of a few Disney specials and standalone series, the MCU is in danger of running out of material. But that sounds like a stupid problem to be worried about, right? There are decades of comic book material that are still untouched, but not all the material can fit into the current continuity of the MCU, and not all of it can be adapted to Disney Plus shows or movies. Some things just don't translate well from a comic book to a silver screen. The MCU laid the foundation with Iron Man and built a universe on top of it. It was 11 years of careful planning, hard work, and patience, but instead of wrapping things up with Endgame and starting something new, they continued to push past it with the multiverse saga. But here's the thing, when Jon Favreau set out to make an Iron Man movie, he didn't have a world-building approach to it. He simply wanted to tell a great story about a great character, and that led to even better storytelling in Winter Soldier, the original Avengers movie, and of course, Civil War. The MCU used to feel like a beautifully made souffle, but now it's like a sloppy soup. There's just too much going on, and newcomers to the franchise have a lot of homework to do in order to catch up. But more importantly, how will Marvel come up with something fresh? And if there are decades of untouched stuff waiting in Marvel's vaults, then what's the solution to our Phase 7 problem? Let's look at how the MCU will avoid its Phase 7 problem. It's a simple fix, just introduce more original characters. The franchise has already had incredible success with several original characters, including the intern-turned-astrophysicist Darcy Lewis from Thor and Katy Chen, Shang-Chi's best friend. And let's not forget one of the most beloved originals, Agent Phil Coulson. Coulson's introduction eventually led to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D, which featured several original characters. Now, as for fresh storylines, the series had it covered with plenty of original plots, as well as those from the comics, and that proves you can't have the best of both worlds in the MCU. On the flip side, both Loki and Multiverse of Madness are based on multiple comics instead of focusing on a single storyline. And of course, more recent standalone shows like Moon Knight and Ms. Marvel don't focus entirely on the MCU. While Ms. Marvel had a lot of callbacks and in-universe lore related to the overarching narrative, Moon Knight focused solely on the adventure of Steven/Mark and their love interest Layla, and that was so refreshing. It felt great to watch an obscure superhero from the comics develop into a badass warrior, whilst having little to nothing to do with the blip or the ongoing multiverse madness. Next, the future of Phase 7 and what it might look like. Now, let's say we get more content like Moon Knight going forward and that Kevin Feige focuses on creating original characters. Phase 7 will likely begin around 2026, but not long after Secret Wars. According to the current schedule, there are 4 movies slated for release right after it, and the first one is on February 13th, 2026, and that's literally 3 months after Secret Wars' November release date. The rest of the projects will be released in May, July, and November of 2026, so it's clear Marvel's not stopping anytime soon. Now, it's really important to note Phase 6 is ending with Secret Wars because it highlights an important turning point in the comics. At the end of the 2015 Secret Wars comic run, Reed Richards, his son Franklin, and Molecule Man recreate the entire multiverse, essentially wiping the slate clean and creating room for a whole host of new possibilities. And that's the MCU's chance to change everything. Not only can Marvel introduce new original characters with standalone projects, but they can also adapt some of the best storylines fans haven't heard of, including House of M, Annihilation, and a better take on the Dark Phoenix saga. Of course, they could also have Deadpool literally kill every single superhero ever and reboot the whole universe. It's been done in the comics, and it's one of the best storylines we've ever read, so we say go for it. But we know that Disney won't be too happy about millions of kids watching Deadpool butcher literally all of their favorite superheroes, so we're betting on the Secret Wars ending. Not to mention, early reviews of Werewolf by Night prove it's exactly what the MCU needed. Let's be honest here, the last few MCU projects could have been a lot better than they were. Thunder. This video would be an hour long if we went into individual issues with every project, so we're specifically looking at Thor, Love and Thunder. Every single problem with the MCU can be found in the visuals and the screenplay of this movie. We don't hate it, we're just disappointed a 1,500-year-old warrior turned into a dumbass when the Russo brothers had a clear character arc set up for him in Endgame. But things seem to be looking up now that early reviews for Disney's Halloween special Werewolf by Night have started coming in. Critics are calling it the best MCU Disney Plus project yet, with many praising the risks it takes as a Disney Plus show, its unique visuals, and throwbacks to classic horror movies. Michael Giacchino, the director of the special, said that its black and white presentation allowed for more blood and gore to be shown on screen. And here's a fun fact: Giacchino and his editor looked to horror movies from the 30s and 40s for inspiration, and they added cigarette burns in the upper right-hand corner of the frame. Those markers appear every 20 minutes and are an homage to the way cinemas handled real changes back in the day. The special also uses real sets and practical effects, with CGI used to enhance what's already there rather than create something from scratch. Maybe that's why Screen Rant editor and hiring manager Grant Hermans said Werewolf by Night is Marvel's true entry and how Blade should be handled as well. Finally, for the next theory, could X-Men take over Phase 7? With Werewolf by Night getting rave reviews from critics, we're hoping Marvel takes notes from Giacchino's fresh take on an MCU project and continues taking risks. As of this video, the Halloween special already has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it proves that new standalone content is far better than the confusing mess the MCU's become. Now, could the X-Men factor into the MCU beyond Phase 6? While there aren't any immediate plans for an X-Men project, we believe they'll take the spotlight in Phase 7, especially considering Kevin Feige's past comments. After his Comic-Con presentation in July, Comic Book caught up with him for a quick interview and joked the X-Men probably won't debut until Phase 10. But Feige quipped Phase 10 is longer than he'd wait, implying the X-Men are probably coming sooner rather than later. Also, there's a rumor that revealed Marvel can't make an X-Men movie until at least 2025 due to certain contractual obligations with 20th Century Studios. Even though Disney owns it now, contracts are still contracts. Could one of the 4 titles slated for a 2026 release be an X-Men movie? Maybe. We've got no idea as of right now, but it doesn't matter if it's the mutants or new Avengers. What's more important moving forward is to focus on original characters, a mix of old and new comic book storylines, and more risk-taking the way MCU did back in Phase 1. That's a wrap for this video. Thanks for watching. There are a lot of concerns about the Marvel comic universe, the least of which is Phase 7. What are your thoughts about where it's headed? Can Marvel get back into the driver's seat? Leave your thoughts with us in a comment